Good afternoon. I will call to order the July 18th meeting of the Minneapolis City Planning Commission. My name is Matt Brown. I serve as president of the commission. I'm joined today by Commissioners Kronzer, Magrino, Slack, Sweezy, Vreeland, and Bockwell. Our first item of business is to approve the actions from the June 27th meeting. May I have a motion to approve those actions? So moved. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. And that motion carries. Next, we'll organize the agenda. You can find hard copies of the agenda in the hallway. We'll determine which items will be considered on consent and which items will be discussed. So starting at the top of the agenda, item number 1 is a minor subdivision of a parking area at 3201 20th Avenue South, 3205 20th Avenue South, and 2009 32nd Street East. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put item 1 on consent. Item 2 is the Krause-Anderson block redevelopment at 501, 507, 515, and 523 South 8th Street, as well as 502 and 518 South 9th Street and 811 5th Avenue South. That's a registered land survey. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put item 2 on consent. Item 3 is a right-of-way vacation on 7th Avenue North. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put that on consent. Item 4 is the Huron and Essex Hotel at 501 Huron Boulevard and 2510 Essex Street Southeast. Several applications for a hotel project there, actually making some amendments to applications that were previously approved. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put item 4 on consent. Item 5 is at 5605 Nicollet Avenue, a variance and a site plan review for a 6-unit multifamily building there. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 5? That's 5605 Nicollet Avenue. Seeing no one, we'll put that on consent. Item 6 is the Embassy Suites signage at 12 South 6th Street. Several applications related to signage on an existing building there. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put item 6 on consent. Item 7 is at 347 through 359 Harrison Street Northeast and 980 Winter Street Northeast. That's a conditional use permit, variance and site plan review related to a bus garage there. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put that on consent. Item 8 is at 3333 41st Street East. That's a rezoning. We'll discuss item 8. Item 9 is the LeBlanc House at 302 University Avenue Northeast. That's an expansion of a non-conforming use for an addition to a bed and breakfast facility. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put item 9 on consent. Finally, item 10 is a zoning code text amendment related to the definition of a half-story. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on that item? Seeing no one, we'll put item 10 on consent. So our agenda as amended is as follows. Items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10 will be on consent, and we will discuss item 8. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? We have a motion and a second.
Mr. President, I need to recuse myself from item number 3.
All right, thank you for that clarification. And Commissioner Kronzer is recusing himself from item 3. So we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as amended. All in favor? Aye. And that motion carries. Our next item of business is the Committee of the Whole consent agenda. Commissioner Slack, do you have an update?
Thank you, President Brown. At the June 30th, 2016 Committee of the Whole, we heard 2 items. First item was a series of land sales, 4754 Camden Avenue North and 4611 Colfax Avenue North. And the second item was a series of land sales at 2101 Emerson Avenue North and 1816 Queen Avenue North. The recommended motion for both items was approval of staff recommendation that these items were consistent with the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth.
Okay, we have a motion finding those land sales consistent with the comprehensive plan. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? And that motion carries. Next, we'll move on to the public hearing portion of the meeting. At this time, I'll open the public hearing for the items on the consent agenda. So again, that's items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10. Is anyone wishing to speak on any of those items? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? And that motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our one item for discussion, item 8 at 3333 East 41st Street. And Ms. Steiner is staff.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before you tonight is a rezoning request at 3333 41st Street East. Some background on the property. The property is currently zoned R5 Multiple Family District. It's a little bit smaller than an acre, and it is located a few blocks south of the 38th Street station near Hiawatha. The proposal is to rezone the property from R5 to the I1 Light Industrial Zoning District, and then to add the Industrial Living Overlay District. There's no specific use proposed for the property right now, though the applicant has indicated in their application materials that self-storage would be the most feasible use in the near term for the property. Just some background on the property. So there's an existing grain elevator that was constructed in 1930 that takes up most of the property, and I'll talk more in detail about that in a bit. So this property falls within the boundaries of the 38th Street Station Area Plan. That station area plan was adopted in 2006, 2 years after the Blue Line went through or opened. It's located in the Hiawatha South District, which the small area plan notes should be evolving towards a moderate density residential district. It's mostly industrial right now. And then the future land use for this particular property was identified as townhomes or stacked flats, as you can see on the page. The rezoning study for the area, which was intended to implement the policies of that station area plan, was completed in 2012. This property was rezoned at that time from I1 to R5. However, and while many of the other industrial properties had similar land use guidance in the small area plan, those other industrial properties actually retained their industrial zoning during the rezoning study with the addition of the ILOD, the Industrial Living Overlay District. However, this property was rezoned to R5. Like I said, I was going to talk about the property history. So it was built in 1930. In the 1963 zoning code, it was put in the light manufacturing district. When we adopted the 1999 zoning code, it was put in the I1 light industrial district. Like I said before, the station area plan was adopted in 2006. In 2008, that's when grain storage at the site ceased. And then that rezoning study and the rezoning occurred in 2012. In 2013, the property went into tax forfeiture. And then in 2015, the property was purchased by the current property owner at auction. So the property has been vacant for over 8 years. And that's important to keep in mind because it's lost all of its non-conforming rights to previous uses under that industrial zoning. So I just used that part of the code just to show that it's because if anything is vacant for over a year, they lose their rights to the previous use or any other uses that would be allowed in the previous zoning district. So to summarize the staff analysis in this staff report, an important thing to note, the station area plan kind of foreshadowed this issue, the issue of rezoning all of these industrial sites, and said because of the specific site conditions of these type of buildings, specifically grain elevators, which are very built for one purpose, rezoning could discourage the reinvestment and the reuse of the site and that at that time, continued investment in the property might actually be more feasible than, or more important than rezoning to be consistent with the land use guidance. However, like I said, the small area or the station area plan was adopted in 2006, and this property was currently in use as a grain elevator in 2006, but not by 2012 when it was rezoned to R5. Some more summary of the analysis. So the I-1 light industrial district will allow more uses that would be easily accomplished with the grain elevator structure without demolishing or significantly altering the grain elevator. While also the addition of the industrial living overlay district would permit the future residential uses that are more consistent with the station area guidance for this property. Also, we found that rezoning is in the public interest to allow for the property to be utilized right now rather than left vacant as it has been for the last 8 years. Also, just to note that the whole intent of the industrial living overlay district is to encourage the rehabilitation and reuse of existing industrial structures for many different uses. And then for the finding about whether reasonable uses exist under the current zoning district, the R5 zoning significantly limits the potential uses of this property, like I said, without demolition or alteration, as no non-conforming rights have been retained. So this property right now is limited to either being a multifamily dwelling, a small community residential facility, a small market garden or community garden, place of assembly, or a child care center. When Hennepin County owned the property, or when it was in tax forfeiture, they did a demolition and site clearance study, and they estimated that the cost of demolishing the structure and clearing the site would be over $2 million. So staff's conclusion essentially was that rezoning the property to the I-1 district with the ILOD will allow for light industrial uses that have a limited impact on the surrounding properties, while also retaining the option for future residential uses as the station area plan recommends. As far as public comments, we did receive, and you should have in your packets, one letter of support from the Longfellow Community Council, which supports the rezoning. And then I'll just end with the staff recommendation, which we're recommending that you approve the rezoning. The applicant is here and can add more.
Commissioners, are there any questions of the staff?
Yeah,
Commissioner Kronzer.
I have a couple of questions. Is this parcel eligible for the National Register?
It was determined as part of the Hiawatha potential historic Hiawatha Corridor Historic District.
When the LRT was?
That study was done in 2008. There's a summary on page 2 of the staff report.
So it is eligible?
Correct.
Okay. And it is within the station area for the 38th Street Station?
Correct.
Blue line. And I also have a kind of a legal question. So the applicant was able to obtain signatures from the surrounding parcels as required. Does that somehow steer us as a commission one way or the other? Or is that just one of the steps along the way?
So in order to even request rezoning, an applicant needs to get at least 2/3 consent signatures from all the properties within 100 feet. So that's just a step, but it doesn't mean that you have to approve the rezoning.
Sure. So, and today is only rezoning. There's no specific development proposal. If we were to rezone today and the applicant chose to tear the structure down, they could do that, and then it could be a vacant site for any allowed use within the industrial district. Is that correct?
That would be correct because it's been identified as a potential historic resource, probably when a wrecking permit would come through, there might be a different level of historic review for the demolition.
But it's not on the National Register currently. It's not locally designated currently.
No, but it would be identified as a potential historic resource. So.
But there's still no hook in there. Okay, thank you.
Right. Are there any other questions of staff? Commissioner Magrino.
Hi. So I'm just looking a little bit at what the industrial living overlay district requires, and I was wondering if you could explain that just sort of briefly. I mean, it says that dwelling units are allowed, but only in certain types of structures. It says sort of up to heights of 2.5 stories, and so I'm wondering if that precludes eventually converting the building to residential, or would it need to be rezoned again?
So the intent of the industrial living overlay district is to allow for the rehab of existing industrial structures. I think the 2.5 story limitation is for single or 2 family. Let me check. Yeah, it would just be for single or 2 family, and cluster developments would be 2.5 stories. So you have to obtain a conditional use permit for dwelling units in the ILOD, but that would be the limitation, or those standards associated with the conditional use permit would be the limitations on that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so all they need is a conditional use permit to then come back through? Okay.
Are there any further questions? Lisa, I have a quick question. When the properties in this area were rezoned in 2012, was the rationale for changing the zoning on this property to residential based in part on the existing industrial uses of other properties, and since this property had been vacant, or maybe it was viewed that it was going to redevelop sooner rather than later, or did it have more to do with kind of the land use policies for that area? That this area has slightly different policies than closer to Hiawatha.
So actually, the whole stretch of industrial uses between the railroad and Dite were slated for townhome or mixed. I can go back to that page. So in the plan, the only retained industrial uses that were shown in the plan were actually along Hiawatha, and then everything along Dite was supposed to be townhomes or mixed flats. But as you can see from the zoning, all of those other parcels except this block retained the I-1 zoning, and the applicant can speak more because they included in their application materials kind of their speculation about why that happened. There was no owner to talk about the rezoning at the time, but I suppose that there wasn't any written documentation that about it being vacant and that making a difference, but perhaps it did.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions of staff? If there are none, I'll open the public hearing. I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first, and please state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon, Carol Lansing. I'm an attorney at Faegre Baker Daniel. I'm representing the applicant, which is MLJ Enterprises, which is owned by Adam Mackey. He is in Washington, D.C., but originally from Minnesota and owns some property here. And when this property came up at public auction, he thought, because he had seen grain silos converted in Europe when he was stationed overseas into housing, what a great idea that would be. And he bought it, he thought, for a great price. But as he looked into it more and learned the excessive costs to actually convert these silos to housing and install floors, at least as a guy just doing it on his own without subsidies and a lot of planning, he's now looked to make some interim use of the property that will create some money to do maintenance, security, pay the taxes on this previously tax forfeited property. I can tell you the history in 212 because I was working with some of the other property owners at that time who were in the station area. And I wish I had brought a blow up. I don't know if they can zoom in on this more. Okay, that's good, thanks. So this, the future land use on this map is consistent with the 2012 small area plan, and this is the site. And it shows you these parcels north along Dite as guided residential, and if you skip up to 38th, you see that there's commercial guidance all around there. But at the time, and the original staff recommendation in 2012 was to rezone all of these properties consistent with this guidance. So all the properties around the station area would be, some kind of mixed use commercial, and all of these properties, including the subject site and going north, would be residential. And that was the original staff recommendation. But a number of property owners, including a couple I was representing, like ADM, General Mills, other smaller, both commercial and industrial owners, said, look, that will make us non-conforming to such an extent that it will impair our ability to invest in our property. And so what resulted is this is the subject site. These parcels that are guided residential are still I-1, and they have, if you look at the overlay map, an ILOD. These parcels up here that are guided commercial are still I-2 with an ILOD. And yes, for this property, there just wasn't a present owner to participate in that study and make the same case. So we're asking, and the council did change the guidance for those properties. So we're kind of asking for a redo to go back to where it was. It will not allow, because there's been a loss of nonconforming rights. In this case, it will not allow a grain elevator use to resume. And, this is an unusual case. This is one of the few cases where that fourth criteria, whether there's a reasonable use of the property under the existing zoning, where the realistic answer is no. With a demolition cost of $2 million, that's not going to happen unless there really is a development proposal ready to go, and it would get reviewed for demolition. We do have neighborhood support and neighbor support, and I can go on, but maybe better to respond to your questions.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Commissioner Kronzer.
To the best of your knowledge, has your client researched historic tax credits for this project, for this parcel?
They have looked at a range of issues, but you don't get historic tax credits without a lot of other funding leading up to there, and they haven't been able, in the time that they've looked at it, to be able to come up with a feasible redevelopment scenario. I think the thinking is that the most likely long-term solution will be to assemble the rest of the parcels on that block that are currently zoned R5, maybe do the housing component there, and see if there's a feasible complementary reuse of the silos.
Have those conversations been going on?
Jeff Locks is here. He is working with the property owner, and I don't, they have reached out to some of the other properties about buying them, but it's kind of a one step at a time. There's not a lot of money that makes sense to invest in this site when the zoning currently doesn't allow you to do anything.
Right. Are there any questions, any further questions of the speaker? If there are none, is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? See no one, I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, we just have the one application before us, the rezoning. Commissioner Kronzer.
I would like to make a motion.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion to deny the rezoning, and I can speak to that if I get a second.
All right. Is there a second? There is not a second. Oh, second. Okay. We have a motion and a second.
All right, so here's my rationale. In my opinion, this is in a stationary small area plan. It's within arguably 2,000 feet of the LRT station. It's a rezoning to an industrial zoning, which allows for lots of stuff. I don't think there's any harm waiting to get an actual proposal, a design proposal, site plan review, those kinds of things that go along with the rezoning. It's very rare that we actually see just blind rezonings without a proposal attached to them. So, I mean, that's my rationale, and if I can't convince you all, that's okay, but I would like to see the next step along with the rezoning application.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Rockwell.
Commissioner Kronzer, I agree in principle, but I think what we always talk about when we are rezoning, and this come up in rezoning discussions when we have a specific proposal in front of us, is that the rezoning is not about the specific proposal. So this is clearly not about a specific proposal. It's about a hypothetical, sketchily conceived storage units. And there were a couple other ideas thrown around, a cafe and a microbrewery or something. But I think our job on this is the zoning, not the proposal. And I tried to find a way around our findings here, but I do think it's a tough site, and the history of the site with only one bidder in the auction, I think, and the history of tax foreclosure makes me worry that we're just going to head back down that route. And I'm not crazy about mini storage right next to a train station, but I think some use is better than no use.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Gagnon?
No.
Kronzer?
Aye.
Lipke-Pierre?
No.
Magrino,
No.
Rockwell,
No.
Slack,
No.
Sweezy,
No.
Breland,
No.
7-1.
All right, and that motion fails. Would someone like to make an alternate motion? All right, Commissioner Vreeland has made a motion to approve the rezoning. We also have a second. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Magrino.
Yeah, I do kind of agree with what Commissioner Rockwell said earlier. I mean, this is sort of unfortunate because I feel like we have a lot of these opportunities where we have like land near a train station and we don't end up utilizing it as much as we'd want to. But I think in this case it is pretty compelling with what's on the site right now that there's not really a practical use for the structure. And I wanted to kind of say on the record that it is unfortunate, but I think I would be supporting staff findings in this case.
Any further discussion? I'd like to add, I do think the addition of the industrial living overlay does help us through this rezoning continue to at least in the very long term, implement the plan for that station area. I think when we look at these individual properties, it is important to look at, based on the current use, based on the current structures that are there, what is going to be the approximate timing of reuse or redevelopment. I think in this case, it's probably a little farther off, but we still are preserving that opportunity as well as allowing the property owner some assurance that there are other reasonable interim uses of the property. So if there's no further discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Breland,
Aye.
Sweezy,
Aye.
Slack,
Aye.
Rockwell,
Aye.
Magrino,
Aye.
Lipke Pier,
Aye.
Kranzer,
Nope.
Gagnon.
Aye.
So that's 7-1.
And that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 8 and also concludes our business for today. We have committee of the whole on Thursday. Otherwise, the meeting is adjourned.
I know. I got here just in time.